for this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about prayer. As we've shifted as a company to becoming more of a discipleship app, I've been reflecting a lot on, my own walk with the Lord. And from what I've learned from prayer is just so significant. I think it's one of the most core parts of being a Christian is praying. Because ultimately prayer at the end of the day is just a conversation with the Father. And that is one of the most pinnacle things of any relationship is communication. As Christians, we are really called to pray. And as Paul says, pray without ceasing. And we see this even in Jesus's life with, him taking time to go pray in private with the Father. He teaches us how to pray as far as like the Lord's Prayer or the Our Father. So I feel as though as a company, our initial focus with our application is to develop prayer within people's lives with the Lord. And, there are a lot of prayer apps out there, and just from what I've learned in my own life, starting with what prayer actually looks like for both me and for like other people that I've seen pray out loud in corporate prayer at my church. It's fascinating to see how much it's different for everybody. And the question is like, how do we create this space for people to define what prayer looks like in their lives? Because every relationship with God is different. My relationship with God looks a certain way. Your relationship with God looks a certain way. And these conversations and the way we converse with God and the way that God converses with us is ultimately going to be different because we were created differently. And I want to be able to not impose the way that people pray through our app, but create a space and invite people to discover what prayer looks like in their lives. And I've really been reflecting on this as far as how we can utilize technology and this tool to create space for people to discover what prayer looks like in their life. And just through my process of learning how to pray, a lot of that has come from observing how other people pray. Because I think it takes a good example for us to truly learn and then eventually adapt it into something that is unique to us. That was one of the issues when I first started approaching prayer. Is just it just feels weird. It's uncomfortable to sort of talk to the unseen, right? Because God exists in the unseen, and creating space for people to step outside of that comfort zone, to just give them sort of the privacy of prayer while still urging them to do so is going to be an essential core part of our app, which is why we're so focused on privacy with still the functionality of capturing prayer in your life or just instances of where God has moved in your life. And then the other part of it is seeing how other people pray and praying with others, because I think there's such strength in corporate prayer as well, of welcoming people into your life to sort of go at our struggles or even celebrate certain things that God has done in our life with other people. So those two core functionalities is where we're really centered around, because there's just been such transformation in my life and just in the life of others that I've seen at my church, that I just want to create this space for other people to experience the transformation of Christ, no matter where they're at in their journey, whether they're just curious or they're convicted in their faith or they're committed. Those are the three key areas that we're eventually going to sort of grow into, and kind of meeting people where they're at in their current journey. But the thing is, wherever you're at in that journey, prayer still remains such an important and critical part of your walk with Christ. So I just wanted to share a little bit about, my journey with Christ and with this idea of prayer, because I want to create space for you guys to like comment in the video or reach out to us on Instagram, and just welcome you guys into talking a little bit about, maybe some of the struggles that you've had with prayer, or even the things that have been successful, what prayer actually looks like for you guys, both on a private sense with God and then also like praying with people. Because ultimately, as we become a kingdom-centered tool, I want to build it with the kingdom. I want to build it with you guys. It's important that we build something that is actually to grow us in our faith with Christ and improve our walk with Christ, because ultimately that is our mission. And I can't do that alone. Because like I said, we all have our different ways of how we approach the Father. And I want to be able to find commonalities. And, I use this theme of create the space, because like ultimately that is what's within our control, of welcoming and inviting God into our lives. Without that invitation, it's difficult for God to move. God will never force himself on us. He will never sort of like take the control without us granting it, because ultimately like that becomes manipulation and not love. And our God is a loving God, and he wants you to make that choice. And there are plenty of instances in the Bible where, Jesus approaches a rich man, and, the rich man says, "Hey, I've done all these things. I'm ready to follow you." And Jesus asks him to, basically sell all his things and follow him. And the rich man ultimately decides not to. Jesus never, ragged on him, or he never forced him or like yelled at him or was upset or anything like that. He ultimately just said, well, you can't follow me, right? So it's like, he'll never force us to make a choice, which is why it's so essential that we create space for the Holy Spirit. We create space for God to move in our lives. And that happens through prayer. That happens through conversation. It happens through expressing our feelings of like why we're even struggling, or why we're angry, why we're frustrated. Like that is sort of the priority when it comes to prayer. That's something that I was able to sort of work through in my own prayer life, of just like my own private prayer with God, expressing these uncertainties, or even surrendering to the idea that like I just don't know everything, and looking to God to speak in ways that went beyond my own understanding. Opening that up, it actually resulted in my like questions being answered in different ways. It wasn't necessarily like a vocal voice or like a direct answer in that moment, but it opens up this space for God to work and show you in the ways that he feels as though you will understand, because God knows us better than we know ourselves. And it's in that surrender and in that acceptance that allows God to work. And it's in that trust. And that's what prayer has ultimately allowed me to do, is develop like a trusting relationship with God, which ultimately leads to faithfulness. When you open your heart to Christ and invite him in, he's going to show up. And through that showing up, you start to recognize that he will continue to show up. And that's what builds this faith. And it's only through a constant conversation and prayer that you also start to discern where he's showing up in your life and how he's answering your prayers. And then you also start to learn more about like who you are, because it just becomes kind of like comical sometimes, where you'll pray about something and then God will answer it. And some of like, it almost like an inside joke where like he just knows you so well, and he'll answer it in a way that you're just like, okay, all right. Sorry. But yeah, I think, and that only comes from like that constant relationship, because that's how like inside jokes are created. That's how a bond is created. That's how, even in moments that you're angry at someone or upset or frustrated, you build a sense of still like having that connection. and being able to actually have that relationship with God where you can approach him in those moments of anger. And it's just a good representation and a good foundation and a good example of how we can start to build our own relationships with people, that we can see how God moves in our life and how God sort of answers our prayers and handles our anger and frustration with such like patience and love, that we start to learn how we can become more like Christ and replicate those same ways that we approach our relationships with people, that we can start to have more love, we can start to have more patience, we can start to have more kindness and gentleness, because God has just been so patient with us in our relationship with him. And I think that's why prayer is such a foundational part of being a Christian, and why like we as a company are trying so hard to create this space and give people the tools to develop what prayer looks like to them, to develop what this relationship with God looks like to them. And then as you start to build this strong foundation with God in your personal life, it starts to become a tool and a way to bless other people, to be able to like not only think about your relationship with God, but other people's relationship with God or lack thereof, and start to build praying for other people in your life or praying with other people. And through that, we start to see like how other people's relationship with God looks like, how they talk to God, how they even like perceive God. And that starts to fill in gaps of ways that we need to sort of like improve in our prayer life, or the way that we perceive God. Some of us may only perceive God as like a friend, as opposed to like also a sovereign being, also a God that is worthy of worship, that is still like our Father, that still deserves this sort of like elevated honor, to know that like he is all powerful. So it's just amazing to see, even through that interaction, how other people pray, and then also just welcoming them into our lives. And instead of focusing on this sort of like vast network of people that we aren't as connected with, we can start to build this smaller network of people that are regularly in our lives, and build depth and build this more like core foundational relationship that is also centered around God, that is also centered around our Creator. And it's the best way to like truly get to know yourself as well as other people, is to see their relationship with the Creator, because ultimately the Creator knows us best. So yeah, that's our like initial focus as a company, focusing on this tool that can help grow people in their relationship with God through prayer, and eventually developing into other core areas, which is, worship, which is study as well, being in the Word. But we're going to focus on prayer first. So yeah, as I mentioned, would love to hear from you guys on how you approach prayer. What maybe areas that you struggle with as far as like building routine, or just kind of like it's slipping your mind, the uncomfortability of prayer, just like any sort of things that you guys are open to sharing in the comments publicly, or if you want to like privately DM me. We'll never share any sort of private DM. We're a privacy first company as far as our app, so like I stand by that. So you guys are welcome to reach out to me. And yeah, more to come on like the actual logistical like development and timeline of things, but I wanted to really get on here and talk about prayer and just talk about where we're at as a company. So love you guys, and we'll talk soon.